I started noticing it in other men before they can name it themselves. A tightening, as if the hallway is getting narrower. They are still functioning, still joking, still paying bills, still working, but there is a look in the eyes that says the walls have started moving in. When they talk, their stories loop. Same fear, same rage, same longing. I feel it in my own body as I listen. The tightenings, the clenchings, the shallow breathing. I know this corridor all too well. I know how fast it can turn into a dead end if nobody throws a rope. There is a line in Buddhist language that steadies me here, the Bodhisattva Vow. Not that I am above this, not I have solved this, but I will stay close. I will work for the relief of suffering. The vow does not erase consequences. It does not glamorize breakdown either. It is a discipline of proximity, being near without being pulled in, standing at the threshold of the black hole. That is what the Edgewalker means to me now. One who lives between worlds, not fully in consensus reality, not fully gone. Someone who has known crisis and exile and inner fracture closely enough to recognize its weather in others. Psychology might call what I am seeing an early warning system, pattern recognition, co-regulation, the nervous system reading signals before the mind can make a story. But it is also a temptation. When you can spot the corridors, you can start believing you are special, that you are above and superior to others. This is when the Edgewalker becomes a performer. That is when helping turns into control. That is when compassion quietly mutates into ego. What I say matters. What I encourage matters. What I normalize matters. I am not a lone savior. If I am going to stand at the edge, I stand with discipline, with boundaries, and with humility. The rope is real. The rope is simple, and I keep it in my hand. I take a slow sip of water and feel my pulse settle. That is the vow in the body. There is a kind of cultural blindness that still shocks me when I look straight at it. A man starts slipping into the labyrinth and the system reaches for one word, one get out of jail free card, mad, not as a careful clinical description, as a complete dismissal, as a stamp, as a way to stop listening to what he is saying. I feel the heat rise in my face when I hear it used like that. My stomach becomes hollow, because I have seen what happens when meaning is stripped away and replaced with shame. In the Yoruba tradition, there is ancestor guidance, an assumption that a person is not alone, that wisdom can come through lineage, through elders, through community, and the unseen web of belonging. Even if you do not share the metaphysics, the ethic, lands. Do not isolate the one who is struggling. Do not exile them into a label because it is more convenient for you to hold. So I learn to hold the tension. I do not deny illness. I do not romanticize crisis, and I do not pretend initiation cancels pathology. But I refuse the lazy reflex that turns a human being into a diagnosis-shaped cage. Some crises are pathological and need treatment. Some are spiritually charged and need a different kind of container. Some are both. That distinction matters. Mental illness and spiritual illness are not identical, even if they overlap at certain points. One may require direct medical intervention and symptom containment. The other may require an environment with spiritual literacy, communal holding, and enough discipline to keep the person from harming themselves or from harming others while the deeper process unfolds. Traditional cultures often knew this better than modern systems do. They made distinctions between delusion and obsession and spirit sickness and crisis and illumination. They had rituals and circles and elders and forms of containment that were not always clinical and reductive. The modern system often reaches for one blunt language and calls the whole field disorder. This is the violence I am pointing at, not because psychiatry is evil, but because over-medicalization can erase the sacred dimension of what is actually happening. The thread demands risk literacy. It demands law. If someone is dangerous to themselves or others, we act. We bring support. We involve professionals. We do not hide behind myth. Psychology might call this sociology of labels. How language shapes identity. How naming can become a trap. When the word becomes a world, a person starts living inside the story, inside the corridor. And if the group is scared, it will keep the door locked. My grounding move is plain. I return to what can be measured without ideology. The same things we've repeated over and over again. Sleep and food and breath and the stability of the body. I ask, who is with you? Who knows? What are the consequences if you act on that impulse? I keep one eye on compassion and the other on reality. Because if we are going to change the culture, we start by choosing belonging with accountability, over dismissal with fear. Beyond critique, I keep another possibility alive. That we need better places, temples of emergence, community circles, healing environments, where altered states are neither sensationalized or flattened, where people are held by both psychological skill and spiritual humility and depth. That is the only critique worth making, the one that points towards better care and actual return. Sometimes seekers come to me with that bright, hungry look. They want the secret map. They want the sentence that makes the fear disappear. And I understand it, and I have walked a similar path. When you have been in the corridors, you want certainty like it is oxygen. In those moments, I can feel the old seduction arise to become the voice of prophecy, the man with all the answers. My hands want to gesture bigger than the truth. Instead, I try to speak like a griot, an African storyteller, truth carried through story, not through domination. I tell them what the thread is made of. I tell them that the spiral is real, but it is not an excuse. If they hear nothing else, I want them to hear that. In Jewish mystic language, there is a phrase that fits this posture. Tikkun, repairing the world. Not repairing your image, not repairing your ego. Repair as work. Repair as service. Repair as small acts done consistently, in the same direction, even when the mind wants fireworks and spectacle. When I offer a map, it is a map that leads back to life. Psychology might call this psychoeducation, giving people a framework that reduces panic and increases choice. But the deeper thing is consent and humility. I am not here to recruit disciples, to play the guru figure. I am here to help someone locate the next responsible step. Sometimes that step is making a call. Sometimes it is going to bed. Sometimes it is admitting they need help and letting the community hold them. Sometimes it is recognizing that what they are calling spiritual may also include mental illness, trauma, or risk that needs more support than I alone can offer. That is why the language matters. If I name the state carelessly, I can intensify it. If I name it responsibly, I might help restore choice. Then I check myself again. Did I actually speak from humility? Did I stay within my lane? Did I invite accountability? Because the work of Tikkun is not abstract. It is how we speak when someone is wobbling. It is how we refuse to turn their pain into our identity. It is how we imagine and point toward better environments. Spaces where people can be held safely with both spiritual seriousness and psychological competence. If the story starts to sparkle too much, I bring it back to the floor. There is a specific moment when I feel the urge to inflate. Someone says, "You helped me." Someone looks at me like I am a lighthouse. The ego loves that. It starts building a throne out of gratitude. I can feel it as a subtle lift behind the ribs, as if my posture wants to rise above the room. That is the danger zone. That is the beginning of the guru costume and the guru complex. So I return to the simplest truth I know, Socrates, and the clean sentence, knowing that you do not know, not as a clever quote, as an anti-guru oath. My job is not to be certain. My job is to be responsible. The thread is not a brand. It is basic containment. Alchemy gives me another mirror here. Albedo purification, the whitening, the washing, not the spectacle fire stage, the quiet stage where you clean what is dirty. You rinse the residue off the story. You separate the signal from noise. You stop feeding the parts of you that you want to be worshipped. Psychology might call this epistemic humility and boundary setting. It is the ability to say, I might be wrong. I do not have the full picture. You need more support than I can give. It is also the recognition that genuine guides in traditions that work with altered states are trained over years and decades. They are not self-appointed because they had one intense, explosive experience. That matters because sometimes the most responsible thing I can do is not to interpret, but to refer, to widen the circle, to invite clinicians and to invite peers and to invite elders and to invite grounded community into the conversation rather than centering it around myself. It is also the ability to tolerate discomfort because sometimes the only way to stay clean is to disappoint people who wanted you to be magic. My grounding is concrete. If I am teaching or sharing information, I teach and share practices and not dependency. If I am guiding, I guide toward community and not toward me. Albedo is not glamorous. It is a rinse cycle, and it keeps the Edgewalker from becoming another trap in the maze. When I forget, the body tells me first. Insomnia, tension, and the jitter and delusion of too much certainty. Service changes you in a way insight never can. You can have 1,000 revelations and still be brittle. But when you choose to contribute, something steadies. It is not a spike of ecstasy. It is weight. It is the feeling of responsibility landing in the bones. I think of Joan of Arc, the holy heretic figure, not as a romantic fantasy, as a warning and a lesson. The fire of conviction can build or can burn. It can create courage or it can create catastrophe. The point is not to imitate her story. The point is to respect the price of fire, especially in a world with laws, institutions, consequences. Then there is the universal myth that keeps returning when people survive the corridor. Phoenix rebirth. Not I become invincible. Not the pain was secretly good. Rebirth is what happens after honest, sober reckoning, after the cleanup and after the repair, and after you accept some things were lost and will never return, and yet you still choose to live. The wounded healer belongs here too, but only if handled carefully. The wound is not wisdom by itself. Broken-bodied elders and healers across cultures become trustworthy because the injury taught them restraint, not because suffering made them superior. Psychology might call this post-traumatic growth when it is real. Increased values and clarity, deeper empathy, stronger boundaries. But it only holds if it is grounded, if you are regulated, if your relationships can survive the truth, if you are accountable. Otherwise, the rebirth just becomes another costume. So I keep it plain and I ask, what is the next responsible action? Who needs to be told the truth? What routines actually keep the body stable? Where are the legal lines in all of this? Where are the community and relational lines in all of this? The phoenix does not rise from denial. It rises arises from consequence met with courage. The sacred spiral does not end with a myth. It ends with a man who can keep walking, one disciplined step at a time. I do not call that enlightenment. I call it practice. I call it staying human, a place where there are no shortcuts. And if there is any hope I offer others from this place, it is not that suffering makes you chosen, but that responsibility can make suffering usable without making it holy in the wrong way.